Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. I am Armin Rose and I will be your guide as we go through the concepts of this course. This is a continuation of the elements of fiction. This is part 6, Characters. Characters are the people, animals, or objects that we follow in a story. According to Karen Bernardo in Characterization in Literature, what does characterization do for a story? In a nutshell, it allows us to empathize with the protagonist and secondary characters, and thus feel that what is happening to these people in the story is vicariously happening to us. And it also gives us a sense of verisimilitude, or the semblance of living reality. An important part of characterization is dialogue, for it is both spoken and inward dialogue that affords us the opportunity to see into the characters' hearts and examine their motivations. In the best of stories, it is actually characterization that moves the story along, because a compelling character in a difficult situation creates his or her own plot. In fictional literature, authors use many different types of characters to tell their stories. Different types of characters fulfill different roles in the narrative process, and with a little bit of analysis, you can usually detect some or all of these types. The following are the types of characters in fiction. Major or central characters are vital to the development and resolution of the conflict. In other words, the plot and resolution of conflict revolves around these characters. Example is Maximus from Gladiator, Indiana Jones from the Indiana Jones Adventures, or James Bond from the James Bond series. Minor characters serve to complement the major characters and help move the plot events forward. Examples of minor characters are Legolas in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies, Edna Mode from The Incredibles, and the Minions from the Despicable Me series. A dynamic character is a person who changes over time, usually as a result of resolving a central conflict or facing a major crisis. Most dynamic characters tend to be central rather than peripheral characters because resolving the conflict is the major role of central characters. An example of a dynamic character is Woody from the Toy Story series. A static character is someone who does not change over time. His or her personality does not transform or evolve. An example of a static character is Yoda from the Star Wars series. A rounded character is anyone who has a complex personality. He or she is often portrayed as conflicted and contradictory person. An example of a rounded character is Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. A flat character is the opposite of a round character. This literary personality is notable for one kind of personality trait or characteristic. The Terminator from the Terminator series is a flat character. Stock characters are those types of characters who have become conventional or stereotypical through repeated use in particular types of stories. Stock characters are instantly recognizable to readers or audience members. For example, the femme fatale, the cynical but moral private eye, the mad scientist, the geeky boy with glasses, and the faithful sidekick. Stock characters are normally one-dimensional flat characters, but sometimes stock personalities are deeply conflicted rounded characters. For example, is the Hamlet type. An example of a stock character is Dr. Emmett Brown from the Back to the Future trilogy. He is an example of a mad scientist. The protagonist is the central person in a story and is often referred to as the story's main character. He or she or they are faced with a conflict that they must be resolved. The protagonist may not always be admirable, like the anti-hero, but nevertheless, he or she must command involvement on the part of the reader, or better yet, their empathy. An example of a protagonist is Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games series, and Batman from various movie, TV, and comic book series. The antagonist is the character or situation that represents the opposition against which the protagonist must contend. In other words, the antagonist is an obstacle that the protagonist must overcome. An example of an antagonist is Loki from the Marvel comic books, TV, and movie series. A symbolic character is any major or minor character whose very existence represents some major idea or aspect of society. An example of a symbolic character is V in V for Vendetta. V is a symbol of protest against the government. Another example is Captain America, who represents goodness and morality. Now we're going to be talking about characters who are considered heroes of the story. Examples of heroes are the Übermensch. An Übermensch is someone who is better than a normal person. He possesses abilities that are beyond the range of a regular person. They are the superheroes, the secret agents, the star athletes, and the geniuses. Übermensch translates literally to Superman, and Superman is the best example of the Übermensch. An example of an Übermensch is Tony Stark, who is richer and smarter than most people. Hence, he created the Iron Man persona. Another example is Optimus Prime, who is one of the best robots in the Transformers. That's why he is their leader. We also have Ethan Hunt, a super spy from the Mission Impossible series. The bootstrap hero is a regular person who achieved hard-won success by working very hard to achieve his dreams. There is nothing special about the bootstrap hero, except for his perseverance and hard work. An example of the bootstrap hero is Rocky Balboa from the Rocky series, and Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride. The everyman hero is a regular person who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He manages to save the day through ingenuity and determination. The everyman hero does not want to be a hero, but he is forced to save the day because of the circumstances that they find themselves in. Example of the everyman hero is John McClane from the Die Hard films, and Ellen Ripley from the Alien series. The accidental hero is another everyman who saves the day through a series of well-timed clumsiness and a lot of luck. He just happens to be at the right place at the right time. This character is used mostly in comedies and by comic reliefs and sidekicks. The best example of an accidental hero is Forrest Gump. Also, all the characters created by Rowan Atkinson, like Mr. Bean and Johnny English, are accidental heroes. The anti-hero is a person who lacks conventional nobility of mind and who struggles for values not deemed universally admirable. An anti-hero is usually vulgar, manipulative, and self-centered. Nevertheless, he is the center of the story, and we are drawn to the challenges he must overcome and the goals he seeks to achieve. Example of the anti-hero is Lisbeth Salander from Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, who seeks revenge on the people who raped her. The bride from the Kill Bill series, who seeks revenge from the people who killed her husband and left her for dead on her wedding day. And of course we have Deadpool, who was originally written as a villain but became an anti-hero. A changed hero is someone who at the course of the story goes from being the bad guy or not caring to being the one who saves everyone. An example of a changed hero is Wolverine from the first X-Men movie, Rick Blaine from Casablanca, and Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family. The hero on a journey is a person who was removed from his original surroundings and taken on an adventure to discover what he was meant to do before returning to his place and making things right. Any character who is called the Chosen One is going on a journey. Example is Neo from the Matrix trilogy, Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, and Marty McFly from Back to the Future. The icon is someone who represents the values of a group or nation and who is sent to save or redeem them. Examples of an icon is Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings and Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars. The moral hero is someone who never wavers from the side of the true and the good. The superheroes, Spider-Man, Captain America, and Superman, are best examples of the moral hero. Other examples include Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird and Harry Callahan from Dirty Harry. The true hero is someone who sacrifices himself to save the people around him. This is usually revealed at the ending of the story. Examples are Harry Potter from the Harry Potter series and Han Solo from Star Wars. Heroes cannot be pigeonholed into just one type. They can be 2 or 3 of these heroes at a time. An Ubermensch can be a true hero, a moral hero can go on a journey, and an anti-hero can be a changed hero. It all depends on the characterization and development of these heroes. So we talked about heroes, we're also going to be talking about villains. So there are also different types of villains. The pure evil is a villain who does bad things simply because they are bad. These villains choose to be bad for the sake of being bad. Every representation of the devil is an example of this kind of villain. Here we have Regan McNeil, or rather the devil that possessed her, as an example of a pure evil. The immoral villain is portrayed as neither evil nor good. Their intentions for doing what they do are either not clear or they just don't care. Examples of these villains are killers in slasher films, killer robots, and animals who eat people. Example is Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The unstoppable villain is a villain who just keeps coming back no matter what the hero does. He is the equivalent of the Ubermensch. An unstoppable villain is usually paired against the Ubermensch because they are equals, but they can also be paired with a bootstrap hero because they can pose a more formidable foe. An example of an unstoppable villain is Darth Vader. The foil is any character, usually the antagonist or an important supporting character, whose personal qualities contrast with another character, usually the protagonist. By providing this contrast, we get to know more about the other character. The perfect example of a foil is Joker. He is the foil to Batman. The villain you love to hate is a person whose physical attributes and demeanor are characteristic of a hero, but whose actions are that of a villain. Examples of these villains are the corrupt officials, the evil nurses and doctors, the strict principal or teacher. Dolores Umbridge is one of the best examples of the villain you love to hate. In fact, she is more hated than the main villain of the story. The charismatic villain is a person who acts evil, but the way he talks and acts draws the reader to him to understand and justify his actions. The reader or the audience knows that this villain is doing bad things, but they're always trying to find reasons why they're doing it in order to explain his villainy. An example of a charismatic villain is Hannibal Lecter. A three-dimensional villain is a person who at the beginning of the story seems like a flat evil character, but as the story progresses, it reveals parts of his humanity, his anguish, and his struggles. By the end of the story, although he has to pay for his actions, the reader wishes him mercy. Because the reader was exposed to his backstory as to how and why he turned to evil, the reader feels sorry for him when his time of reckoning comes. An example of this three-dimensional villain is Gollum or Smeagol from The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit stories. The psychopath seems like a normal person on the outside, but who does unspeakable acts of evil with no shame or remorse. He makes the reader afraid that he could be any one of his friends or family. Example is Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, and Tom Shiger from No Country for Old Men. The everyman villain is a person who is thrust into villainy by the circumstances surrounding him. He slowly becomes more evil as the story unfolds. So like the everyman hero, this everyman villain doesn't want to be a villain, but he is forced into a situation where he has to turn to evil. An example is Michael Corleone from the Godfather trilogy. So since he comes from a family of mafias, he inherited the business and had to become a mafioso. The villain we secretly want to be is a person who carries out activities that people want to do but will not openly admit to. He gives in to his impulses without control, satisfying his needs and taking control over people without thinking of the consequences of his actions. These are the characters who beat other people up because they find them annoying or rallies against an oppressive government. Oh, these are some activities that some of us want to do, but we don't get to do in real life. An example of this type of villain is Tyler Durden from the Fight Club. Now, as with heroes, the villains can also be categorized into different types of villains and not just pigeonholed into one type of villain. This also depends on the development of his character or characterization. Characterization is the way a character is fleshed out in order to be a complete semblance of a human being. Characterization can be done in several ways. The first is through direct presentation. This refers to what the speaker or narrator directly says or thinks about the character. In other words, in a direct characterization, the reader is told what the character is like. When Dickens describes Scrooge like this, "I present him to you, Ebenezer Scrooge, the most tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner." This is a very direct characterization. Another type is indirect presentation. This refers to what a character says or does. The reader then infers what the character is all about. This mimics how we understand people in the real world, since we can get inside their heads. In other words, in an indirect characterization, it is the reader who is obliged to figure out what the character is like, and sometimes the reader will get it wrong. Here are 10 direct or indirect ways in which a character can be revealed. By psychological description, by physical description, by probing what he or she thinks, by what he or she says, by how he or she says it, by what he or she does, by what others say about him or her, by his or her environment, by his or her reactions to others, and by his or her reaction to himself or herself. Characterization can be done through character arcs, which can happen to either a hero or a villain. Well, the first character arc is becoming a hero. So this is the journey from being a helpless victim into the savior. A character with this character arc is Sarah Connor from the Terminator series. The moral arc is the transition from good to evil or evil to good, or developing morality coming from a place where the character doesn't care. Example of this character arc is Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy. A reluctant hero character arc starts with the character having hero traits in him to begin with, but not wanting anything to do with becoming a hero until the time when he definitely needs to. Example of this is Captain Kirk from the Star Trek series, and Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy. The next character arc is leaving it all behind. It involves forgetting everything you know and love about your life in order to start a new one. An example of this character arc is E.T. from the E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and Red from the Shawshank Redemption. Red has been in prison his whole life, and when he finally gets released, when he is an old man, he doesn't know anything in life except being a prisoner. The next character arc is changing together. So this involves two characters, and they change together either for the good or for the bad, or they change in different directions. Example of this would be Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. A full circle character arc means that after everything that the character went through, he is exactly the same person as he was in the beginning of the story. Example of this is Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean series. So Jack is a pirate and will always be a pirate no matter what happens to him. Also, Bilbo Baggins from Lord of the Rings. The next character arc is Facing Death. So this is a character arc for characters who are terminally ill or they know they are supposed to be sacrificed for the good of mankind. And they have to come to terms with their impending death. An example of this arc is Donnie Darko, who foresaw how he will die, and so he's figuring out if he wants to go through with it or find another path and avoid his death. Okay, the next character arc is the rise to power. So this is someone's journey from being nobody to being somebody important. With Tony Montana from Scarface has this character arc. Next character arc is Descending to Madness. So this is when a character starts losing his mind until he goes insane. Example is Travis Bickle from The Taxi Driver, who goes on a murderous rampage. Rise and Fall is a character arc wherein the first half is the rise to power and the second half is the fall from grace. An example of this character arc is Vito Corleone from The Godfather, as it chronicles the life of Don Vito as a mafia boss. Now here are several things to remember in characterization. First is that literary characters may embody more than one of these character types at the same time. A dynamic character may also be the antagonist, and a protagonist can also be a flat and stock character, or a one-dimensional hero. Here's a very common mistake. While characters are often round and dynamic, that does not mean that these two terms mean the same thing. Round refers to a character's complexity, while dynamic refers to a character's development over time. So students also make this mistake with flat and static characters. I do not own the pictures seen in this video. Credit for these pictures belong to their owners. The ideas discussed in this video are based on the content standards of the Department of Education. Thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson.